And welcome to our community. Susie Thomas here with Pat Kreider from the First Ladies Library. Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, my first question, right before we went on the air, I said, what is the difference between the First Ladies Library and the First Ladies National Historic Site? Two different areas, two different things, but partners. Explain, please.
Well, we started out as the National First Ladies Library, and that was the private nonprofit founded by Mary Regula, and it was founded in 1995. And we had our first physical location opened in June of 1998 at the Saxton McKinley House. And then in October of 2000, by an act of Congress, the First Ladies National Historic Site was established. And our entire site then became a unit of the National Park Service. We, the National First Ladies Library, are a private partner with the National Park Service, and we operate and manage the site for the Park Service.
Okay, now where is that second site located?
The buildings are both on Market Avenue South, and they're about a block apart. The Saxton McKinley House is at 331 Market Avenue South, directly across from the McKinley Grand Hotel. And then the Education and Research Center is one block north at 205 Market Avenue South.
So what kinds of things would we find in, say, the Saxton House, and what kinds of things would we find in the second building?
Okay, so the Saxton McKinley House was the family home of Ida Saxton McKinley, and it was the private residence where her and William lived longer than any other private residence. And it has been restored to resemble a period of the 1870s to 1890s when the McKinley would have lived there. And so that house has a number of tour rooms that will take you through, and you would learn about how a first family would live in the 1870s to the 1890s.
Now, the furniture there is not theirs because that's at the McKinley Museum, yes? Or you have a similar furniture of that same era in the home now?
Well, interestingly enough, that when we first started out, we did a lot of reproduction furniture that would have been of the period. But more recently, we have been getting long-term loans and donations of original furnishings from the Saxton House from descendants.
Wow.
And so slowly we're getting little pieces back that belong in the house. Very cool things like a music box that Ida McKinley bought on her 1869 grand tour of Europe. She actually bought that for her mother.
Wow.
A safe that belonged to William McKinley, things like rocking chairs, things like an invalid table, which is something like a hospital table that Ida McKinley used when she was in poor health. And just many, many items like that are now coming back to the house.
That is very, very cool. It is interesting. Since we're in their house, let's talk about the McKinleys a little bit. And I understand that there are lots and lots of letters in the First Ladies Library written from presidents to their wives, but not as many written from William McKinley to Ida because they were rarely apart. Is that true?
That's correct. They were rarely apart. And then along the way, there was actually a fire in a warehouse it's actually where the McKinley Grand is now. And so a lot of the communications were lost in that fire. But no, the McKinleys spent most of their time together. When he was a governor in Ohio, she was in Columbus with him. When he was congressman in Washington, she spent her time in Washington with him. And so they did spend very little time apart.
Was that because she was ill?
No, I think they just wanted to be together.
They just really liked each other.
Yes, and the thing of it is the McKinleys, early in their marriage, they had two children, two daughters. And both of them tragically died very, very young.
Yes.
One, it's like 6 months old, and the other one at about 4.5 years old. And so basically for the rest of their lives, it was the two of them. And so they wanted to be together. They enjoyed each other's company. Ida was very, very intelligent, and she was very politically astute, so they had a lot of conversation that they could have together.
That is so fun and interesting. Well, okay, we're going to get back to them, but I neglected to ask you, what kinds of things would we find at the Resource Center, the Educational Resource Center?
Well, the Education Research Center is a multi-use building, and we have exhibit space there where we have exhibits on various themes about first ladies that change a couple times a year. There's a small Victorian theater where we have programs for schools and for the general public, and we have lectures, and we have a lot of different things like that. We have a research library in that building. We have some conference space, and that's also where we have our archival storage areas.
So neat. You know, Pat, and we're speaking with Pat Kreider from the First Ladies Library and Museum. This is something that we would think, or one might think, would be housed in Washington, D.C. You're talking about a national presence that covers all of our presidents' wives. And how in the world did it land in Canton, Ohio?
Well, it landed in Canton, Ohio, because Mary Regula, who's wife of former Congressman Ralph Regula, for years realized that there wasn't a lot of information out there on most of the first ladies, and she was bound and determined to do something about it. And so about the middle of the 1990s, about 1995, she finally said, you know, I'm going to start a library for first ladies. And, you know, I live in Navarre, and Canton is my husband's district, and that's where it's going to be.
Yeah, just really, really
Yes.
cool that it's right here. And I think there are still to this day some people who don't realize it.
That's right.
Just so amazing. Well, let's do what we can to rectify that. Give us a little tour, if you would, an audio tour of the Saxton House and what we would find there now.
Okay, so when you come for a tour, your tour actually begins at our Education and Research Center, and you tour the exhibit that's currently going on. And right now, we have a campaign-related exhibit, timely enough, and it's entitled Trials of the Campaign Trail. And it looks at how difficult it is for first ladies and for other wives of candidates to be on that campaign trail, and how they meet different people, and they're subjected to some very difficult questioning, and they're subjected to heckling at different times, and how, you know, they're expected to be on the campaign trail, although that wasn't always the case. But in today's world, if you don't see a candidate's wife, you're wondering why. So you start there, you tour that exhibit, and then you go over to the Saxton McKinley House. And when you walk in, there's tour rooms on each floor, and there's a formal parlor, and there's family parlor and dining room, and you can see a little kitchen and a breakfast room. And then when you go up to the second floor, there is a bedroom and a sitting room where we talk about that tragic time of the McKinleys' lives with their children. And then you go up to the ballroom. And through research, we've discovered that when the McKinleys lived at Saxton House, that was most likely their living space, that ballroom. And off of the ballroom, there's an office that William McKinley used as his law office, and then to conduct presidential business. And so they would have lived up there, because while they lived in the Saxton McKinley House, Ida's sister and her husband and her 7 children.
Oh, my goodness.
And Ida's father and Ida's stepmother and even Ida's brother lived there at times. So it was a very full house. And so that awarded Ida and William some privacy to be up on the 3rd floor. And he met clients up there.
Wow.
And so they had their own little oasis.
So fun to think of a 3rd floor ballroom.
Yes.
I know the Saxton House has it. The McKinley, or the Maslin Museum, Maslin Women's Club,
Yes.
has the 3rd floor ballroom.
Yes.
And kind of think of that as today's rec room.
Yes.
You know, that
Yes.
everybody's got one either in the basement, but this was the 3rd floor ballroom.
Right.
And where the family lived and entertained.
That's right.
So cool. I want to swing back around to what you were talking about, the wives on the campaign trail. I think this is something that we don't really think about enough. When a person decides that they have been called to run for president of the United States, really affects the entire family, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
An exhausting schedule. How do these women, what do we know about them as far as, do they all seem to be in? Do some of them begrudgingly get dragged along? What do we know about these first ladies when suddenly their husbands decide they should run for president?
You know, and the thing of it is some of the women are very much in. You know, people like Rosalind Carter loved to campaign. Lady Bird Johnson loved to campaign. And then you have others like Laura Bush, that when George W. told her that he was going to run for Congress, whatever his first political offices were, he made a promise to her that she would never have to give a campaign speech. Well, that didn't last too long.
Right.
And so they grow into it, and they have missteps. Mm-hmm. And I think that during the first presidential campaign for the Obamas, Michelle Obama found that out, that if she answered a question and it was misconstrued, it was blown out of proportion, and it was very frustrating to her that would happen.
Became a sound bite, and then she seemed to disappear from the campaign trail for a little while.
Yes, because quickly something that you said that's misconstrued becomes a liability. Come around to the second campaign, and now she's seasoned. She's a seasoned veteran, and she sailed right through it, and she was able to do that without problems, and she could handle hecklers, and so it is very difficult.
But I would think for many women, you would go back and say, at that point in time when you proposed marriage to me, I did not sign up for this.
That's correct. That's absolutely true. And unfortunately, in today's world, there is that expectation that the wife is out on the campaign trail.
Yeah, yeah. Pretty amazing stuff. We're talking with Pat Kreider. She is you're executive director, is that right?
That's correct.
Of First Ladies Library. And you must have fun finding out some surprising facts about some of the First Ladies. What have you been most surprised to find out?
Having come into the National First Ladies Library without a history background, I actually have a computer background. It's a learning experience for me every day. And we're in existence because people don't know about all of the First Ladies. They know about some, but they really don't know a lot. And so as you develop exhibits and you develop programs, you start learning things that are very surprising. Things like about Lou Hoover, who you don't know a lot about, and her husband wasn't a very successful or popular president, but she was a phenomenal woman. She spoke 5 languages. She spoke Mandarin Chinese fluently. They lived in China during the Boxer Revolution, and she had small children at the time. She learned how to shoot a revolver just to protect herself. She was the first woman to graduate from Stanford University with a degree in geology.
Oh, my goodness.
Her and Herbert Hoover translated books from Latin to German, like geology books. Just an amazing. She had an architecture background, and she's actually did drawings for a home that's in California. Amazing woman. She believed in physical fitness for women, and we're talking the late 1920s when women didn't sweat yet.
Right.
But she was rode horses, and she was a swimmer, and she really pushed for physical fitness in women. And to do that in an acceptable way, she became involved in the Girl Scouts, and she was the first president general of the Girl Scouts. And after that, all the First Ladies have become honorary presidents of the Girl Scouts, but that was an acceptable way to push physical fitness. So just an amazing woman.
My goodness, how fun.
Yeah.
Pat Kreider knows everything about First Ladies. She is the executive director of the First Ladies Library right here in Canton, Ohio. Lou Hoover is one. Now, wasn't there a bachelor,
Yes.
a president who was bachelor? Who was that?
That was James Buchanan. And his niece, Harriet Lane, served as his hostess.
He still needed someone in
Yes.
that role, correct? Tell us a little bit about her.
Well, Harriet Lane was James Buchanan's niece, and she was a wonderful hostess. She enjoyed doing the state dinners and things like that, but she also had causes that she was involved in. She was very much involved in rights for American Indians, and really worked in those causes a lot,
Interesting.
even after they left the White House.
So interesting. So many things to learn. We need to take a quick break. We'll be back after these words. You're listening to Our Community.